Okay folks, thanks to everyone who made the effort to travel here today. I know there's people who travel quite a distance and some are local as well. It was really inspiring to see such a strong turnout of people from all over the country. Particularly thanks to Owen and Byron who really brought to life what it must have been like in those nights up in Vinegar Hill waiting for the oncoming assault. For me, one of the most inspiring things about the rebellion was the fact that people of all backgrounds, Protestant, Catholic and dissenter, set out to use the words of Wolfe Tone to break the connection with England. And for me, it kind of shows there's no ingrained loyalism within the northeast of the country, and quite the opposite. It was the area of the country that first lit the spark of liberty and nationhood. And I think there's many lessons to be drawn from that today. But I'll let Kerron expand on that, and we should have some time for questions and answers after. So thanks very much to everyone who made the effort to come, and thanks to Gary for organising as well, and Wexford Remembers for a minute.
Yeah, good morning. Gary agus an Christe Kamar look garmin as an Quira Hort to me on week as an Desh and Toyder for a law and Toyder in my Wally Googish Rathcoole. Thanks to the committee, the Wexford Remembers 98 committee and Gary and all the organisers. I'm very grateful to be here and to be able to put my research in front of you. Can you see that? Yes. Sort of there. So, as I said, well, actually, I just want to note that I was in Enniscorthy back in '98, actually, and I was talking to Owen earlier about the commemorative centre, and I'm actually one of those sort of formative moments, epiphany moments, when I became sort of interested in history and republicanism and all, was when I visited that centre and just saw the sort of what was documented by Owen really on Vinegar Hill, the brutality of the English and the heroism of the Republicans and whatnot. And I was disappointed to see then that it was going to be, it was underfunded and they were talking about making a distillery out of it. So, but then now I'm glad to see that it's, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's funded now, it's going to survive, and that's a great thing, you know. Because if it can sort of produce, or if it can even light the mind of a, you know, few children to become involved in history, it's a great thing. The lads have done a great effort, a great job at detailing everything about Vinegar Hill and all the events and the sort of military strategy and everything about that, and the whole rising in Wexford. So I'm not going to go into that. I'm going to look at Rathcoole, which is my hometown really, and what I did my master's research on about 10 years ago, and I'll go into a bit detail about that. The project, I suppose, emerged from my sort of dislike for the historiography at the time, I suppose. You had this book here by Pakenham. It's a good book, empirically speaking. It has loads of facts in it, has loads of information, and it charts the course of the rebellion quite effectively. But really, the conclusion it comes to, this is The Year of Liberty by Thomas Pakenham, for those at the back. The conclusion it comes to is one that it was a sort of sectarian rising, it was an agrarian rising, it was about, you know, peasants who were angry, pissed off peasants, and that was it, do you know what I mean? But really, and actually that drew a lot from one of the chroniclers, the early chroniclers of the 98 Rising, which was Richard Musgrave. He was a staunch loyalist, and he wrote this book, Memoirs of the 98 Rebellion, in 1802. And his whole argument was, right, the rebellion sectarian, but he had a political agenda, of course. He was a loyalist. He wanted to portray it as a Catholic conspiracy. He wanted to sort of make out that the priests were more involved than they were. But so, coming up to the 98 bicentenary, actually, and it's one of the few sort of times where changing in the history or revisionism of the history was worthwhile, because they challenged this narrative. The historians at the time, the likes of Keogh and Tommy Graham, people like that, Jim Smith, Men and No Property, great book, and then later Patterson, they looked at, well, what was actually going on. Well, the United Irishmen, the Republicans, were going out from town to town, from village to village, building republics in the villages, they called them, through propaganda and through mobilising people and so forth. And they rose up because they were politicised, because their minds had become republicanised. So the sources I used for the project, the rebellion papers, there's a wealth of them there in the National Archives of Ireland. They're mostly from a loyalist point of view, so hence the likes of Pakenham and that writing in the late 20th century, that was strongly influenced by them, and they didn't look at other sources, they looked at top-down sources, what the landlords, what the British Army, what the generals, what they were saying, you know. And then you had another important source there, the Freeman's Journal, but that was actually, at the time, this man called the Sham Squire, Francis Higgins, was in charge of the Freeman's Journal, and he turned out to be a spy, so he was actually a propagandist on behalf of the British at the time, controlling the paper. Where have you seen that? We see that today in some places, saying nothing. But so basically, those are the sources that these historians in the 20th century used before people started looking at different sources. So some of the newer sources that came along, well, in my case, there was a map, an Ormsby's map, that was quite useful in showing the land patterns in the area, which showed the sort of class distinctions in the area. You had the Clancy letters as well. They were sort of letters internal to a family, and they showed the sort of political rifts even within families, where the youth were going with republicanism, but the father was more staunch loyalist, protecting his property and whatnot. You had the state prisoners petitions as well. They're sort of one of the few times where you see people who are in favour of the rebels writing in to get leniency for them after they've been arrested. So they show a sort of broader view of what the aims and objectives of the rebels were than the rebellion papers which the generals wrote. And then later you had R.R. Madden, Richard Madden. He did a sort of memoir as well of the rebellion in the 1830s, and he was looking at, he actually interviewed, you know, ex-rebels or interviewed relatives of rebels and so forth. So, he was more sort of from the ground up as well. And then you have also out on Gaelic, so the Irish language songs in 98 days, like Sleep Them On and so forth. If you look at these sources that are written by the people or collected among the people, they give you a very different perspective than what was written by Dublin Castle, essentially. So the context, Owen's already done a good bit of that. Essentially a colonial context. You see the map there, the transfer of lands from Catholic to Protestant after the Cromwellian plantations, and that really sets the context in terms of land, in terms of land ownership, the sort of three layers of society, as Owen mentioned, Anglican, Presbyterian and Catholic at the bottom. The penal laws introduced, and of course, let's not forget the penal laws were foisted on Presbyterians as well. That's why they became radicalised as well. You have the American Revolution, and that really rubs off in Ireland in the volunteer movement in 1782, which is a sort of armed colonial nationalist movement, if you like. So the Protestants in Ireland became sort of aware of themselves as Irish people rather than sort of just British planters. And then importantly as well, the war between Britain and France from sort of the revolutionary period after the French stormed the Bastille, of course, Napoleon and not Napoleon yet, but the French Revolutionary Directory went to war with Britain. And then during all this, of course, the United Irishmen are founded up in Cave Hill and in Dublin in 1791, inspired by the sort of international currents. So, although the rebellion is local, and it did, it's very personal and local, I'll come to that in a bit. It's international and it's national as well. It's influenced by these waves of thought coming across from France and what's going on in America as well. So what are the politics of the United Irishmen? As I mentioned, it's inspired by France, Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité, and by Tom Paine's Rights of Man. You have to remember at this time, even questioning the sort of divine right of monarchy, the divine right of kings is looked on as radical, that someone should be, shot out and buried, and become a sort of king just because God ordained it so. You know, this is even saying no, that's a bit bold. You know, at that time that's frowned upon. You know, so that's what Tom Paine was doing. He was talking about the common good, the commonwealth, and the rights of man. And this was a product of the Enlightenment, when people started to question monarchies and old institutions like the Catholic Church and so forth from around 1685 or so. So there's a long gestation, if you will, a long sort of waiting period between when someone goes, here actually this monarchy is wrong, and when, you know, in 1789 in France, when it really comes to the boil. So, as Owen mentioned as well, there was that important pamphlet there by Tone, Argument on behalf of the Catholics of Ireland. And even to do that as sort of an Anglican or Presbyterian at that time was radical, to say actually there's this mass of people in the country who deserve rights as well. You know, the powers that be didn't like that. But I suppose importantly, you know, in terms of the United Irishmen, there were radicals among them, but it was a sort of not broad church, but there was conservatives among them as well. For example, W.J. McNevin, he was sort of bourgeois conservative, United Irishman, and then you had the likes of Thomas Russell, Jenny Hope, and that on the sort of radical wing of the United Irishmen. They had much more progressive ideas about where things should go, should a revolution succeed. And even at this time again, you know, it was seen as a radical method to even do things that we take for granted today, like, you know, start a petition if something's wrong in the community, or, you know, knock on doors and try and campaign about something in a peaceful manner. So the United Irishmen started off as reformists, really wanting to change things in a sort of peaceful way and, you know, effect change through basic campaigning, but they were driven by the state repression and by the British imperialism really into more radical means. That's an important point. Oh, and also as well, in terms of their sort of early decolonial efforts, they were one of the first groups who looked at the language question as a sort of decolonial question. So there was the famous paper, The Northern Star, in Belfast, which talked about, you know, radical republican politics in what they called the Athens of the North in Belfast. But there was also an issue of Bullet and Tuller, which was a paper by Thomas Russell, which set out, he wrote with a Gaelic scholar from County Down called Patrick Lynch, which set out a sort of blueprint, I suppose, for how to decolonise Ireland in terms of language. So, Rathcoole itself, what's it like on the eve of the rebellion? Rathcoole is a small town southwest of Dublin, where I live. It's out on the sort of main road to Munster. It was sort of a tranquil little corner of Dublin, nestled between the capital and between the big sort of wooded estates in North Kildare. We had Lord Edward Fitzgerald and people like that. And really there's not much storing in it. I suppose there's a majority of Catholics in the place. There's Anglicans, a small minority, and there's no real industry or anything to speak of. But it's strategically important because it's on this coach road, which Owen mentioned earlier, because the whole sort of postal network, communications at the time was linked through post, obviously, and going along the coast road. So that's important in terms of the rise when it comes to the town. There's no real defender activity in the town. The defenders were people who are a group who would come to the fore in Armagh in the 1780s during the Armagh Troubles, when there was sort of economic competition there between the weavers and the Orange, what became the Orange landlords later. The defenders were Catholics or secret society that came to the fore and tried to protect Catholics' economic interests and their lives as well, really. But that meant in Rathcoole, because that wasn't going on, there was no sort of politicisation really through other means until late in the day in 1797. So one of the big things that happened in the lead up to the rebellion was the recall of Fitzwilliam, as things, you know, the United Irishmen begin to demand reform for Catholics, and then you get this favourable Lord Lieutenant called Fitzwilliam in, and he tries to bring in a sort of modicum of reform, just something small, but he's the loyalist in the castle and in the government recall him basically to England. So this pushes the United Irishmen into a greater position of, right, they're not going to give us anything, so we need to be radical as well. At the same time, the British government are suppressing brutally the defenders in Connaught in particular throughout the country. And at the same time, the United Irishmen link up with the defenders and forge an alliance basically between Presbyterians and lower class Catholics, middle class Presbyterians and lower class Catholics. So there's no real recruitment going on around South Dublin, Wicklow at that time in the mid 1790s. And what happens is Bantry Bay, as was mentioned already, 1796, it fails. As you know, they could throw a biscuit, they were that close, but it fails. And instead of sort of demoralising the United Irish cells around the country, it actually gives them a morale boost, because they think actually the French are with us now, they're going to stand with us, and we have a shot here basically. But at the same time, the Orange Order and the Loyalists are forming a sort of White Terror campaign, what becomes known as the White Terror campaign, where they're going around pitch capping people, and you have the likes of Hempenstall, I think his name was, the walking gallows. He's 6 foot tall and he half hangs people on his back, and these sort of stories spread through peasant society, and people become terrified of them. So they actually join the United Irishmen en masse. So these sort of things are combining at the same time. And also as well, taxes are an issue, because the British went to war with the French in 1793. They foisted more taxes on the ordinary sort of worker and peasant, and they're out of pocket. So there's economic factors as well. General Lake, it was basically, well, I don't always like using terrorist as a sort of loaded word, but he was the terrorist of his day, General Lake, He brutally suppresses the United Irishmen in Ulster in 1797, and what that does, it means that Dublin is now the capital of propaganda. So propaganda, handbills, ballads, newspapers, the press was the newspaper at the time, that all starts flowing out of Dublin into Leinster, and particularly through Rathcoole. So it's at this point where you see the inhabitants of Rathcoole start flocking towards the United Irishmen. So you can see that there wasn't agrarian tensions, there wasn't much sectarian tension in the village, but by the sort of increase in numbers in the United Men at that time, that they're being radicalised by this, by the republicanism essentially. One of the main people, I should say as well, at this time, as they become radicalised, they sort of, the rising, as I mentioned, is personal, is national, but it's international as well. But as they become radicalised, they start to sort of take their class grievances out on, local landlords, local gombeans, shall we say, and you see raids on houses for arms and so forth, and you see the killing of one Mr. Buckley. So these sort of class and personal grievances in a local area are bound up in the wider sort of Republican struggle as well. And leading it in Rathcoole was a young man named John Clinch, one of the leaders anyway. He's only 13, I think he joined the United Irishmen in 1792 on Fishamble Street in Dublin. It's a popular street there if you know Darky Kelly's, Fishamble Street. And by sort of 1797, his house there, it's called the Shanty, or the old house in Rathcoole, as you come into the place of noticing on the left. His is the mansion, the Clinch house. They're an old sort of minor gentry Catholic family, but the young son becomes involved, and that house really is the centre of operations as the rising approaches. Felix Rourke is another man. He lives at the top of the village. He's from a sort of small farming background. He lives in Broadfield. His father's a farmer. He operates the toll gate at Rathcoole, and he actually rises to the rank of colonel in the Kildare United Men as rebellion approaches. But Lord Edward Fitzgerald then, he's captured, as was noted before, by again a spy called Magan in May 1798. So, you know, things begin to unravel at the national level, at the level of the Leinster Directory. And then the whole plan around sort of capturing Dublin and using these outlying towns. I didn't get my maps up, I lost, like I remember Byron earlier, I lost my USB thing, but I have maps that show basically the strategy of Dublin, the United Irishmen and Leinster, to capture Dublin and then cut off the coaches, and that gives the signal to Munster and the provinces. But because Dublin's not captured, things go wrong in Rathcoole, and things also go wrong in Rathcoole because of a spy as well, called Walsh. Part of the plan was to infiltrate the yeomanry, and they managed to do that successfully, but and gather a number of arms. But what happens is the Walsh basically touts on them and foils the plan. So Clinch went on the run in the lead up to the rebellion. The rebellion, although there was men training up on the hills above Rathcoole, the rebellion sort of doesn't come to much in Rathcoole, and they go to other areas and become involved there. Funnily enough, they were training up above on a sort of windmill hill as well, it's called. It's on the crest of the commercials, the hurling club in Rathcoole, windmill. Sort of similar to Vinegar Hill, but they were training there, but there wasn't any big great battle. So Clinch goes on the run, but then he's captured, and he's executed, or before his execution in Newgate Jail, he actually comes across Lord Edward Fitzgerald, and he, you know, Fitzgerald's distraught by this because this young man's about to be executed. But he also writes a letter to his father, and I suppose it's not like the speech from the dock of Emmet in 1803 or anything like that, but I'll just read it. Honoured father, I expected to have seen or heard from you here this. I fear my fate is determined. When told him to suffer death this day, it would be a great satisfaction to me to see you before I die, and if you would bring or send a priest to me, I think then I could die happy. At all events, I will meet my fate with fortitude. I would not for worlds exchange situations with Walsh, that's the my prosecutor, who has behaved in the most base and treacherous manner and swore to several falsehoods. His charges were as follows: that I swore him to be true to the French, and that I was a sergeant in the rebels and attended a meeting with sergeants to elect a captain. Dear father, I assure you the foregoing charges are false, and as I hope for salvation, I declare the truth at the court-martial. I hope, dear father, you will bear this with fortitude and comfort my dear mother on this trying occasion. I am, honoured father, your dutiful and now unfortunate son, John Clinch. I think it just sort of shows the humanity of, obviously he's a young lad, he's about to face death. He was involved, there's documentary evidence to prove that, but he's, you know, he's facing the gallows, so he tries to sort of say that he wasn't. Not all the great, you know, all the United Irishmen made great speeches, they were humans after all as well, you know. So Clinch is caught and executed, and then sort of Wexford rises the following week, and in late May and early June. Dublin and Kildare rise then, and that picture at the start was actually a prosperous, one of the main sort of Christy Moore's hometown, one of the main sort of victories for the United Irishmen there, where they attacked Captain Swain, who was a notorious militia captain, and they killed him, and they burned about 40 militiamen who had been torturing the countryside beforehand. So I mean, things peter out, and we've already heard about Wexford, but I think Rathcoole, it just shows the sort of different personal dynamics. If you read the book, available in all good bookshops. No, I'm only messing, but it's on Four Courts Press. It's available on Four Courts Press if you want to read it. It shows sort of the personal dynamics of the rise, really, away from the sort of national stuff and the more sort of heroic stuff. It's, I suppose, it might be of interest to people in that regard. So, just finishing up, I mean, one of the interesting things, I suppose, is the memory of 98. We saw the pikemen, Father John Murphy, and there's pikemen in other villages and towns across Wexford. I suppose in 1898, these things were commissioned or built, and I suppose right through the 19th century, you see this memory of 98. I mentioned the songs earlier, and again, this sort of difference between what the top-down sources are telling you and what the songs and the ballads are telling you, and the sort of oral folklore, the oral history, and that's then embodied in the sort of the statues then after that. One of the great sort of revisionist tropes with regard to the 19th century is that there was no sort of memory in 98 and the people didn't care about it, do you know what I mean? But if you look at the sources from the bottom up, you see that they do. And that they did and they still do, and that's why it's important that commemorative societies like this continue to honour the memory. Do you know?